And once again, I want to welcome everyone to the webinar on recruitment and retention of Black union researchers. My name is Ben. We're going to give people a couple more minutes to get on to file in to the webinar, and then we'll get started in a couple more minutes, and I'll introduce our speakers. Okay, everyone, we're going to go ahead and get started with the webinar. Once again, I'd like to welcome everyone who's on the line, as well as our presenters. My name is Ben Woods. I'm a researcher here with Jobs with Justice and the coordinator of the Labor Research Action Network, who is hosting this webinar. Today we have two speakers. We're going to be discussing the recruitment and retention of Black union researchers. And we have two presenters, Marc Bayard, who is the director of the Black Workers Initiative with the Institute for Policy Studies, and Cassandra Ogren, who is the deputy director of strategic research at the International Brotherhood of Teamsters. And like I said, today the title of this webinar is the recruitment and retention of Black union researchers. And how we came to this webinar and sort of the project that we're working on, this is part of a larger sort of project we are working on in terms of creating a network of Black union researchers and a mentorship program for Black union researchers. It started in June, really, of last year at the National Conference for LRAN. Cassandra and Marc were both on a workshop panel that we had discussing the same topic. And what we saw was the excitement and sort of the ideas that people were very interested in the topic and wanted to continue. And so after that, we got people's names and numbers who attended the particular workshop. And we had been having a series of phone calls about every other week, sort of thinking about how we can do some sort of project to increase the numbers of Black union researchers. There's a dearth of them within the labor movement in general, whether in working directly for unions, even in nonprofits as well. And so out of that, we decided that we wanted to create a mentorship program where, veteran researchers and younger ones, or those who would potentially want to come into the labor movement as researchers, this is a space where they can work together, support each other, and not just to get hired, but also retention, because that's an issue. Once people get hired, oftentimes they don't stay for very long. So that's sort of what we'll be doing next month is February 15th at the here at Jobs with Justice. We'll be sending out an invitation tomorrow, but February 15th from 2 to 5 p.m. At Jobs with Justice in Washington, D.C., we're going to have a sort of Black union researchers convening. of different people who are students, people who are, young researchers, veteran researchers, to sort of have a discussion and begin the process of creating this network and mentoring program. So that'll be February 15th at 2 p.m. At Jobs with Justice, and we'll be sending out an invitation soon as well. So what I'll go ahead and do is first pass it off to Marc, and he's going to talk for a moment, and then Cassandra after him. And then we'll have a question and answer session, sort of question and answer. So we'll probably won't go past, a little over an hour for the entire webinar. But Marc, you can go ahead and start.
Great. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you, Marc.
Great. I wanted to make sure I wasn't on mute. Well, it's great to have so many folks on this webinar. I know that there are folks from the labor movement and some NGOs, as well as some academics. And part of what Ben had wanted me to talk about was to give sort of a brief history of I guess maybe the formation and the creation of the modern day labor researcher position, and how it's evolved and how its evolution, I think, in many ways has greatly impacted the accessibility and the opportunities for Black labor researchers to be a thriving part of this part of the labor movement. As a way of background, I started with the AFL-CIO as a researcher in 1998, and so it's hard to believe that's literally 20 years ago. So I guess that's why I can talk about the history of it. So in terms of the modern day labor researcher, in many ways this position kind of evolved and began in the mid-90s as part of the AFL-CIO's New Voice campaign that was led by, at that time, President John Sweeney, coming into the AFL-CIO and really coming in with a mandate with Rich Trumka and Linda Chavez Thompson to change the face of the labor movement and to try to save the labor movement. I think prior to that formation, I mean, you did have some really strategic labor research taking place. You had the food and allied service trades, which did a lot of labor research. You had some unions like Cassandra's, the Teamsters union, and unions like Unite, who were really specializing in doing labor research. But in terms of really taking it and expanding it into the overall labor movement, it really came at the same time that Sweeney came in. It came in with the same wave of Union Summer and the expansion of the Organizing Institute, the idea of creating a cadre of labor researchers to help national campaigns, help local campaigns, to be interchangeable. That was really a major push in the mid-90s. And so research is really an outgrowth of all of this. And who were? I think a very important thing is to understand, who were these labor researchers and where were they coming from? Some of them were recommendations from progressive academics and professors that folks in the labor movement knew. They said, give us your boldest and brightest students, from econ departments and political science, your young Marxists who want to do work for the labor movement. Many of them were recruited from some of the top schools in the nation. Schools like Cornell and other top schools were really seen as targeted places for trying to get this young new cadre of researchers. A lot of them were, strangely to say, were folks who couldn't hack it in the Organizing Institute. Like they just weren't meant to be organizers, but they really had a love of the labor movement. They may have gone through the 3-day Organizing Institute, and people said, well, maybe they have a lot of skills in other areas. Maybe they're not people, but they could do a lot of other work for the labor movement, and research became an opportunity. And I think probably the last place where researchers were acquired, and this is actually where I came from, was from the nonprofit NGO world. Folks who had been doing, corporate campaigning for nonprofits and strategic campaigning for nonprofits were drawn in into the labor movement. And so those were sort of the four main places that both I recall and I remember friends and allies coming from to be part of the research part of the labor movement. So the problem with this, though, of some of this limited pool, was that you ended up with a lot of 20-somethings, primarily white male researchers, and who their bosses were usually 30 to 40-something white male directors. And so this, in some ways, the birth of the union research movement also kind of mirrored, some of the stuff that was happening in places like Silicon Valley at the time, where, people who were drawn towards a range of jobs on the internet and the web and things of that sort were definitely being pulled into the labor research world. I mean, just as a perfect example, I literally remember as a labor researcher, the first time folks on my team started using Google. I mean, I remember literally saying, "What's that? What's Google?" But it was like we were using that search engine, as soon as it came out to for the labor movement. So just to give you a sense of the history, but there was really no diversity, in the pool of folks that I was the one African American labor researcher that I knew of at the time, and so there was just a really, really small pool of researchers. But that said, what this pool did was that this pool was also very unique to the overall labor movement. You had a group of 20-somethings who were, very, very highly educated, and at the time the labor movement was very, very rank and file focused. You had a group of folks who were very tight knit because there were so few researchers that if you were in the building trades union, you were helping public sector researchers. If you were an industrial researcher, you were helping folks in the telecom sector, because you were all kind of working in this sphere that was not that common to the overall labor movement. Another just sort of anecdotal example, my boss years ago used to be Ron Blackwell, who ran the strategic campaigns for the AFL-CIO, and he would go to executive council meetings. And I remember Ron came back and he said, they don't even know what we do. They think it's alchemy. Like whatever you guys have to do to give us some sort of edge on a company, go do it. But that's sort of how insulated the labor research world was from the, on the ground, elements of the regular labor movement. And so in some ways, the folks who did labor research got really, really close and really, really tight knit. And a real network was built amongst those folks. And people who went from working from one union to another, some people became other people's bosses. 20 years later, many of those researchers are now research directors for a number of unions that have research departments. And so that network, which did grow and expand, but in many ways it grew and expanded amongst those that knew each other really well, I think actually leads to some of the issues and concerns that we have with today. It's not the issues and concerns are about the work, but I think there is a realization that we have to expand the pool of who is hiring researchers. We have to expand the pool of who is seen as a researcher, because I think in some ways the image of a labor researcher to an employer or to a union has been shaped by the images of the past 20 or so years of who has acted as a researcher, which again has been primarily white males with higher education, specific computer skills, sometimes legal backgrounds, and I think that's limited opportunities and access for people to say, well, can I do this job? Particularly African Americans and Latinos, and I think it's also again limited the opportunities for people who hire who they think are researchers. And so the last thing I'll say before we keep talking and opening it up, because I know this will be a robust discussion, is that I'll take a union and I'll just use AFSCME as an example, and why this particular project is so necessary. If you take a union like AFSCME, and you look at the fact that they have probably, I think, a third of their membership is African American, and if you look at their staffing in the range of different departments, maybe just even at headquarters, you'll find a lot of African Americans, but you may not find African Americans working in the research department. And part of that is, again, based upon a lot of the structures, the stigmas, the image of what is a researcher. And so people might say, even if a job gets posted for someone in the research department, you may not see as many African Americans applying to it as you might see them applying to something in the education department, organizing, even larger public policy, because the realm of researcher has been so defined over the years. And again, part of why this whole conversation is here is that we want to have a greater expansion of that, because there are many people who can do the work, and we need more faces doing the work so that more people who come in the future can see others like them, which will help with retention as well. So that's sort of a broad overview. I literally did sort of 20 years in 7 minutes, but I think we'll have a lot more time for conversation and discussion.
Okay, great. Thank you, Mark. Appreciate that. That was really helpful. Next, we'll have Cassandra is going to give her presentation, and then after she's done, we'll do a Q&A after that. So Cassandra, you can go ahead.
Sure. Thanks, Ben, and thanks, Mark. I'm going to talk primarily about what my approach has been to hiring in a sort of general sense that hopefully will give some people some insights and ideas and angles, and also I think build off of what some of Mark said about what I see as the major challenges around hiring today in the labor movement. I really appreciate Ben's initiative on this to really, unpack and raise up the profile of the importance of recruitment and retention of Black researchers, of that level of focus on this. So one thing I think that's a real challenge today, and again I may echo some of what Mark is saying. The labor movement is not huge. There are limited resources. We're not like a big corporation that can say, hey, we're going to have this initiative, we're going to hire X number of people of color or Black researchers or, into whatever position, and we're just going to do it. And we have the resources to hire, a bunch of people straight out of college. We could hire 50 people this year. Let's see who makes it, let's just do it. Personally for us, we have positions open periodically, but a couple of years could go by when we don't have a new position open up necessarily. So, it makes every time you hire a big decision. And it means that there's not, you can't bring about change quickly. I think the other big thing is, in terms of what Mark is talking about thinking about who is a researcher, how do we define that person and what they do. I think that's evolved quite a bit beyond the early days of kind of classic strategic corporate research and power mapping of companies and writing company profiles. I'm guessing that many of us still do a lot of that. But certainly I always strive for us to be taking it a step further, doing different things, looking at different angles, doing more standalone projects that might be heavier on data management or on, a public budget analysis, or potentially focused on policy. And so I think the further we get away in some ways and sort of diversify away from what's seen as kind of the original traditional, dig up dirt on the company kind of union research, I think the more we need to be thinking more broadly about how we're recruiting for every position that we do have open, also considering that, again, finite resources, finite amount of time to do things. We want people, we want to hire people who are bringing a new skill set to bear. It's certainly something that I always have in mind in terms of, bringing someone in who knows something that I don't know, who knows how to do something that nobody else on the research team knows how to do, is kind of one of my core tenets. And one thing I've consistently tried to do is really, try to broaden the applicant pool. To Mark's point again, I mean, we've all got a lot of traditional networks. Once we've been doing this work for a few years, people to reach out to say, hey, I've got a posting, can you pass this around? There's the good old unionjobs.com. And there, I think it's really kind of getting a balance and, again, a nod to Ben on this, on, building new recruitment networks that get beyond that, but are still targeted enough that we're getting qualified applicants, who are really interested in these jobs, who know what they're getting into, who are able to, frame their experience in a way that, makes it relevant to what we're doing. And so, I think that's really key, is starting out, moving forward and, as we continue, building research teams and as new people come on board, for me, it's really about, the first thing out of the gate is, having effective recruitment tools that are, getting the concepts of what it is to be a researcher out in a way that people with non-traditional skill sets or with new skill sets are going to be attracted and be interested. So, having a diverse applicant base to begin with, I think really paying attention to, hiring that's people with skill sets outside of that traditional, I keep using that word, but, the sort of original strategic research sort of model to really bring unions along in a new direction. And then I think when people are in positions as researchers, every research department is run a little bit differently. Some unions, our union, the Teamsters, we have one department that really specializes in contract costing and collective bargaining agreement, support. Our department is strategic research and campaigns, so we're really fully dedicated to supporting organizing, supporting difficult bargaining, supporting and developing corporate campaigns. So I realize a lot of listeners have, and participants in this webinar, their workplaces are structured differently in terms of what their responsibilities are. But for me, I think really a key thing when we kind of transition from recruitment to hiring and retention, it's really about making sure that people feel like they're part of the campaigns we're working on. And I know, Marc, you'd made one reference to people being, potentially, maybe tried out organizing, it didn't really work out for them, but being a bit divorced from kind of what was happening on the ground. And, I think it's really important for people to want to stay in the long term. Obviously, opportunities for skills development, take a new class, do a training, get more involved in learning about a different industry, work collaboratively, but also really feel like you understand what the research you're doing is being used for, and really giving people the opportunity to weigh in on campaign development so that there's more back and forth about, it's not necessarily here's all this research, figure out what you want to do with it. It's a lot more collaborative and inclusive. I think obviously, I'll count myself in this bunch, but for those of us who are doing research, obviously we're attracted to, to some degree, and to Marc's point, again, different skill set than being an organizer. Of course you're capable of sitting down and like working away at your desk, by yourself for a day or so or longer at a time. But I think it does us all some good to really make sure we're plugged into the bigger picture of why we're doing what we're doing. Which is another thing that I've really always been striving for amid, with the research team here, with our campaigners and organizers and others. So, the last thing I would just add, and this isn't, again, not necessarily specific to Black applicants, but, and I said this in the June meeting as well, I'm just always want people to really, when they do apply, to really be confident, to really think about, how to present their skills to show that, they bring something to bear here. And I'm talking more specifically about women, the kind of confidence gap and the, really being able to get out there and sell yourself and promote what you've done and why it's important. From what I've seen over the years, I think it's real. And I think it's really important to, keep that in mind and really encourage, especially women applicants to be, not sell themselves short, not, get into an interview and say that, oh yeah, that wasn't really such a big project or no big deal, or I just helped on that. Those are kind of, take those out of your vocabulary, please. Tell me why would be a great asset here. So that is, the main stuff that I wanted to react to, having, directed the research team here and hired, staff over the years. So I hope that's helpful and builds somewhat on Marc's comments, and look forward to opening up the discussion.
All right, great. Thank you, Cassandra. That's was helpful too as well. So now what we'll do is go ahead and open it up for questions. There's a slot in the webinar. If you can raise your hand, I'll call on you and I'll say your name and then let you go ahead and ask the question yourself. So if anyone who has a question, you can raise your hand through the webinar and I will call on you. Eric, I think you have a question.
Yeah, Eric Dernbach here from the Laborers Union. And Ben, I think I'd asked you this before. I don't know what our latest data is on the demographics for union researchers. We suspect, or we know, it's mostly white guys, but I didn't know if there was a sense of what the data looked like.
You know, do either, I don't, that's something I know we've talked about on the phone calls, but we don't, I know I don't have that information, but like Eric said, it's from looking, anecdotally, it definitely is majority white men. Mark or Cassandra, do you have anything you want to add to that?
I don't either. I mean, I think the big question, if one were to try to parse that out, would be what departments you would want to include in terms of collecting that data. Just to my earlier point about, I mean, we've got people doing research in a couple of different places in the union, certainly, and that's probably the case for others, but I don't have numbers.
Okay. All right, if nothing else, we'll go to the next question. John, you have a question, you can go ahead and ask.
Yeah, this is John Zrolnick from Lane in LA. So just a question for either the presenters or anyone else. If you are, what are the one or two or three concrete steps that have been most helpful in expanding the applicant pool?
Well, this is Marc. I'll take a shot at it. I don't know if there have been that many clearly defined concrete steps to expand the applicant pool. I think that's one of the questions that we're posing, and I think and Ben would know better because he's talked to more people, but I've been on a few calls with the researchers, and I think people are pretty clear that there actually hasn't been that much done to expand the applicant pool, and so that this is an attempt to do that. I think there were, last year at the LRAN conference, some folks regionally gave some examples of what they were doing. They'd have local roundtables in their community where researchers would get together, and sometimes they'd be sitting together with community groups. So they'd be both sharing ideas and information across the aisle, and there was some diversity amongst the researchers in the community groups. But a lot of it was, very localized and sort of ad hoc examples that could be replicated and expanded. But of course, I think as Cassandra pointed out, there's so many different kinds of research that go on right now that the term is kind of loosely defined, and if you add labor and community, you're looking at a lot of different examples. But I think the reality is that amongst the limited surveying that Jobs of Justice has done, I think the reality is that there's not that much going on, and thereby this is an attempt to expand that pool and to really make it better known that this is an area of work that needs expansion.
And I would just add, I think, what I've always looked to do, obviously, sort of, like I said, get beyond that unionjobs.com place to start, gotten postings out to, groups like USAS, thinking about other kind of student groups or activist groups or professional associations. LRAN, I think, has been helpful to that regard. I think there's more we could do that's more targeted. I think it's really about, expanded, targeted recruitment with really specific goals in mind. What I wouldn't encourage is anything that involves, posting on the traditional job boards. And folks may have, and John, you may have already done, have had this experience, and you know what I'm talking about, where you get this flood of people applying who really don't even know what they're applying for, and you can tell that pretty quickly. So I think figuring out, that right kind of level of deeper recruitment and, who you're reaching out to, and again, keeping in mind that like I said, kind of right at the beginning, the challenges, we're not necessarily hiring a lot of people straight out of undergrad. So, often looking for people with more background or more with, higher education. And so figuring out, how to get your announcements to the right places where you're really getting people who are going to be strong candidates.
All right. Let's see here. Looks like we have a question from Mark Murphy.
Yeah, this is Mark Murphy. I'm at AFSCME, and I had basically the same question as John, and maybe I'll just try to rephrase it a little bit, see if it sparks any other responses. What would be, professional associations sound like they might be a useful avenue. Are there particular professional associations, African American associations, that would be useful places for us to reach out to when we do have an opening?
Well, this is Marc. I think, thanks for the question, Marc. One of the things that I would say is that during in the 90s, when the organizing was taking place around the OI, there was specific work that the AFL-CIO did at historically black colleges and universities. I mean, there was recruitment that was done at schools like Morehouse in Atlanta to recruit more African American organizers. And that actually was very successful. So looking at, historically black colleges and universities would definitely be a good idea. Looking at the economics, political science department of a number of these schools would definitely be a good idea. Obviously, networking with professors at those schools would be a good idea. So I think those are ways of expanding out the places and potential pools of applicants. And I think the other thing that would be a good idea is that so many people have come through the labor movement. When you're not rank and file, a lot of people come through internships. And so that's another really important thing. But I think the thing that's often, labor movement doesn't do this so much, but a lot of nonprofits do, is that unpaid internships, rarely get people of color, participating in them, because many people of color just economically can't afford unpaid internships. And so structuring those entry opportunities, I think it's also very important to making sure that more people of color actually see the opportunity and apply for it, and then say, this is the kind of work I want to do going forward. So I think that's one example of some of the networking that needs to be built upon and expanded.
Okay. All right, so it looks like we have a question from Kate. You can go ahead and ask it yourself, Kate.
So I've been sending on average, some years 40 people, some years 20 people as researchers into the labor movement, and at least half of them have been women. And the unions that do comprehensive campaigns hire women as much as men. Often they hire more women than men. And they are hiring, just so to be clear, they're more likely to hire a Latina or Asian woman than they are to hire a white man. So in terms of the gender race, and if there were if there were blacks in the program, they would be hiring them. So the demographic makeups of research departments is not mostly white men anymore. The directors may be white men, but there's quite a few unions that have women as directors of research, and their staff are 40 to 50% women. And I'd say of the unions that are doing comprehensive campaigns and research, ones are doing comprehensive campaign and doing strategic research, they have at least 40% of their staff are women. Now, the unions that aren't running those kind of campaigns don't have women on staff. But the ones that are hiring women. So the Teamsters have women in their strategic campaigns department. SEIU has they have half women. Unite Here does, and SEIU has a lot of women of color. Unite Here is hiring. When they hire, they're looking for women. and they're looking for people who speak Spanish, because they're hiring their researchers also as strategic campaigners. But the only union that I find is actually looking and aggressively recruiting blacks is AFSCME. And that's for every job. So that's the difference. So that's just the answer to your question. I actually keep stats on the race of people. So when people ask the numbers.
All right.
I think that in terms of race and class yes, the people coming in from colleges are young, but the class of people coming in from colleges are not, these are not, the students most likely to go into the labor movement are working class, here on full scholarship, and and just because they've gone to an Ivy League college does not mean they come from a wealthy family. The ones who come from wealthy families are not interested in going to the labor movement. So the students of color who are here on full scholarship. So recruiting the ones who go into the labor movement from here are worth recruiting.
Okay.
So it isn't, don't assume class by what university they go to.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you, Kate. That was very helpful, especially the number side of that. That's not known. Marc, Cassandra, do you want to respond to anything that was just said?
No, I mean, I think it's great that Kate is keeping the stats. That's definitely, and I think you're right that the evolution of where people are doing research, and I think that's changed a lot, because at least when I was speaking, I focused in particularly in the 90s and early 2000s, and obviously there's been a lot of not as much as I think everyone on this call would want. I mean, or we wouldn't even be on this call. But I think there definitely has been some real growth in terms of particularly women, and it sounds like women of color, participating more in the labor movement in the research field. So I think that's great. But I think we're all hoping that we can take it even to the next level. I mean, particularly given obviously the changing demographics of the workforce, and trying to marry our staffing with the folks that we're organizing as much as possible.
Okay. All right. So we have a question from Carol. You can go ahead.
Hi, it's not a question, it's a comment. I work for SEIU International, and I'm on the Organizational Equity Committee of the Research Department. And I must say, I can speak for the international. I would have to look at the locals, but I would be surprised to see difference. We don't have a single black person now in the research department of the international level. We had recruited several Latinos, all of whom have left, except for maybe one or two. And, and we have really, one of the reasons I got on this call is because, we have been thinking seriously about how to get out to some of these recruitment places that you've talked about, and trying to think about how to rewrite the job description so that it would be interesting to other people, as well as how to retain people in an environment where they don't feel like they're getting the same type of opportunities as other people because there's structural barriers like there are in the rest of society. So when I heard that SEIU has a lot, it's I can't speak for the other labor unions, but SEIU has made the international has made great efforts, but it's still a very white department.
All right. Do you all have Marc or Cassandra, anything you want to add to that?
Just a quick response. Thanks for your comment. I think it resonates for me in terms of my earlier comment about the importance of having research staff really understanding the kind of work, what the research is being used for, working with organizers, working with campaign staff. And, obviously to Marc's point and some of the points that have been made earlier, people obviously understand the importance of, recruiting organizers who, look like the people they're organizing and speak the language of the people they're organizing. And, to the extent that I think we can bridge the disconnect and kind of take research out of that, rather separated, kind of walled off area, and really, and think more broadly about redefining research to include things like, doing surveys and, developing ways to collect data about, a bargaining unit or a work group. And the more that it's not just sitting in front of your computer, but it's also strategizing, and it also involves, there's community-based types of research. I think the more that you can kind of raise the profile of similarly having research that look like the workers whose companies or employers they're researching.
Okay. I think, let me see. Looks like Kate, do you have another question?
Yeah.
Okay, go ahead.
One of the biggest barriers I've found with the many of the students who come through the black colleges or through state schools or whatever, who come to our summer school, has been when they discover that the writing demands of a researcher. They're interested in research, but they feel like they don't have the they haven't had in college, they haven't had the writing preparation to do a research report, and or they go to apply for jobs with unions, and they're turned down because of their writing skills. And when they give a writing sample. And I think that just like unions have done things where they have, given opportunities for ESL, helped with ESL training for staff where language was a barrier, that, there is a problem if the writing demands are high, if students come from colleges where they never had to write a big research paper before, and the barriers, they just don't know how to do that, and that's just something they have to learn. They haven't had to do citations. They haven't learned. No, they haven't been taught the grammar, but these are things that can be learned. And if that's the barrier to getting a job, is just having to learn those skills, that we should, if we want to get people into these jobs, but the problem is simply they didn't get it in their secondary and college education, then we've got to think of a way to stop that from being the barrier to getting into the jobs. And I've had that happen again and again in the summer school, where students say, well, I don't want to take the credit part because I don't know how to write, and I can't deal with it in a week, but we could figure out a way to solve this problem so that they don't say, I can't do it. And so that's a barrier I see all the time.
All right. Thank you, Kate. Marc or Cassandra, do you have anything you want to add to that?
No, I think that's a really good point that Kate has made. I think different than obviously, or to some extent, than organizing. But you see this when a lot of unions take rank and file members into the shop to become organizers. There's a realization that there's training that has to be done ahead of time. Those folks may know the industry, but they don't know. So the effort and the resources are put in to make sure, because there's a belief that if you have some rank and file folks doing the organizing, they'll do a better job organizing than if you don't have rank and file folks. So it's another example of where unions, in addition to the ESL example that Kate made, that unions do put that extra money in, thinking that the person that represents them, can do a better job than if they just hired, again, maybe a college student to do the work. So another good example of unions putting their money into their own membership, and I think that this is another clear example where that should be done.
And I think it is interesting to hear that that's an issue. From my end, I feel like what I hear the most when I ask people, well, what do you think what's your biggest, everyone's favorite job question, what's your biggest weakness? People usually will say something like, "Oh, I wish I had a better foundation on, finance or economics, that kind of thing." I don't usually hear writing too much. But to that end, I think for me, obviously, if that's an issue, let's think about how to address it. But, yes, obviously, I want someone to be able to write a brief, write a memo. But in terms of skill set, when someone's presented a writing sample, I'm as interested in, obviously, it being coherent and well written, but also in it, in what sources are they using? Are they being creative? Are they, or are they kind of like just looking at the 10K and checking off boxes? So I think it's also important, I don't want people, I would say, to the extent that people are saying, "Oh, I'm not a good writer, therefore I can't do this." That almost gets back to that confidence conundrum that I was raising, that yes, that's part of it, but that's definitely not all of it. And, not everybody on the research team here is doing equal amounts of massive, reports and writing, because quite frankly, we're thinking about, producing things that people can read, can think about, what actions can come out of them. So if anything, I tend to err away from the sort of, master work on a company or whatever, and try to move in different directions. And if you've got, a great skill set that's more data-based, and you're like, yeah, I could write, I can write memos and, summarize things. It's really about how do you not just write, but extract the really valuable information. So, that's a really, the kind of, what does this all mean now that you did all this research? So I hope that's helpful, just as, a perspective on, writing is important, but it's not the be all and end all. And that, I think people shouldn't be discouraged or say just right out of the box, oh no, I can't do it.
Okay, thank you both, Marc and Cassandra, for those answers. Next question is from Courtney. You can go ahead and ask your question.
Okay, hi, my name is Courtney Bolden, and I recently graduated from Cornell, the ILR school at Cornell, and I'm looking to get involved in the labor field in a research capacity, so I'm excited about the event that's being planned for February 15th. I think that's really cool. But some of the feedback I've gotten from interviews or just other people in the labor space that I've spoken to is before getting into research to maybe try organizing. And I'm wondering if either Marc or Cassandra or anyone that has an opinion on that, if you think that organizing before trying to get into working for a union in a research capacity, how much that really matters or how valuable that would be. And I missed the part of the comment from Cassandra a while ago. You had mentioned something about hiring right out of undergrad. So I was wondering if anyone could expand on that.
I can, but Marc, do you want to go first?
Oh no, feel free, Cassandra.
Okay. No, thanks for your question. So, in terms of hiring out of undergrad, it sounds like you're finishing up undergrad and looking for a good way in. I think, The challenge for us is really always weighing, what new skill set is someone bringing, and often, depending on what someone's done in undergrad, it doesn't. I mean, it happens sometimes. Like I've hired someone out of undergrad, but I think looking for opportunities where you've done research in some capacity. Some of the more robust internship programs amongst unions here, I think are a really good kind of way in the door. I think that's what really I'm interested in seeing, to the extent that someone might not have a lot of years of experience, but to show that they, really have a grasp of, what's the nature of the work we're doing, have built up some skill sets, and people, I think, as Marc pointed out earlier, and people coming out of different academic departments, may very well come straight out of undergrad with a skill set that, that we might not have, right now on the team, and that value. And so I don't want to suggest that, it's out of the question, but I think the key is really, having that experience, having, something new to offer, a new perspective. I personally, I think the key, obviously, is for all of us to be grounded and know who we're working for. And I certainly never forget that I'm working for our members. And I, spent some time doing some organizing in my 20s. But that said, I wouldn't think of that as like a prerequisite to being a researcher. And so I don't want to suggest that, there shouldn't be opportunities to, be an organizer and say, yeah, that's not really my thing. Move into a researcher. I mean, as Marc said, that's happened a lot over the years. And I think most of us who are in research, I don't know, I don't have the numbers, but I'm willing to bet that at least many of us have done some organizing at some point, and kind of figured out where we have the most to offer the labor movement in terms of our own skill sets. So it could be valuable. I wouldn't say it's kind of, a requirement. I think, kind of demonstrating your ability to kind of understand the goals of the labor movement, be grounded, in the campaigns that we're doing, and build out a skill set that you've applied to some kind of labor side or progressive campaign, I think would be things that I would be most interested in seeing. I hope that's helpful.
Marc, was there anything you wanted to add to that?
Not really. I mean, I think it would be, I mean, there's obviously a benefit in spending time with the membership and understanding, the actual concerns of the workers and the workforce in the industry. And you do have a higher chance of learning that on the ground as an organizer. But I think for a lot of locals, as opposed to working for international, I think you probably are doing both. I think it's probably much more hand in hand. So you can probably get that full experience, probably working in the local more so than if you're working for the an international, where you may be specifically working on a specific kind of research and a specific kind of department. So it kind of depends on maybe the kind of research you're looking to get into and whether you're looking to work locally or nationally.
All right, thank you. All right, so the next question. Hold on. I think Kimberly, you have a question. Can you unmute yourself? You go ahead.
Yes, I'm unmuted. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, I am just really curious about the data specifically, because no one's actually said there's 2%, 5%, 20%, and I'm really interested in knowing what those numbers are nationwide. How many specifically Black people, not people of color and not women, are being represented in this field currently?
Yeah, let me see. Like I said, we don't, that's something we've talked about. We don't know, I know on the phone calls we've had, we've discussed that, possibly even looking into doing some sort of small study ourselves, because we don't know any of that information. I think Marc and Cassandra said they're not sure either. But I think Kate said she'd done some research and she just raised her hand. Let me ask her. Kate, you can go ahead.
Yeah. The last time I looked at it, the numbers were higher than they are now. What happened is that there was a whole lot of unions laid people off, and so we don't have current numbers. So the reason that we don't have numbers is there's been a lot of changes. So when I did have numbers on union departments, the numbers were about 5% or 4% for blacks. They were very low, but it's much lower now. I know it is because at the international level of unions, it's they're a lot of the staff are unionized, and so it would be by seniority, and the blacks were all recent hires. And at the local level, the local level, there's been a lot of restructuring. Locals being merged and things like that. Plus, a lot of people there's this 7-year itch that people in the labor movement get, where after they've been in the labor movement 7 years, they tend to go back to school or switch jobs. And so a lot of these, and also we have the problem that people of color go into the labor movement, if they're not mentored and supported, they leave, and a lot of blacks go into the labor movement and they're the only black in the department. And so without the kind of support you need, and I know from my black students who've gone in, they've often also been sent to states and locals where they're not just the only black in the department, but they're also in an area where when they go to locals, they're in areas where the staff and the community, there isn't a black community, and they don't feel like they don't have a community of support, and they face quite a bit of racism in the community. So I think there are lots of issues relating to why people don't stay.
Thank you, Kate, for that. That was very helpful. Let's see. Does anyone have any more questions? Right now, there aren't any questions being asked. We're almost at an hour, so we've kind of done a good job with time. Doesn't look like it, so we can kind of begin to close out. Marc and Cassandra, if you want to have any sort of final comments, you two can go ahead. Marc, you can go first.
No, I mean, I'll be brief. I think this is a very useful discussion, because I think we did really both historically and contemporarily look at some of the gaps, and we're definitely raising concerns. I think the idea of recruitment and retention being critical for this is important. And I think something that we didn't talk about as much is the reality of the campaigns that we are looking at, I think require a diversity of staff, where people are trying to organize, the community that they're trying to organize, researching things that the community has an interest in, as well as what the union has interest in. Because I think that there could be ways in which the information, or some of the information that unions discover in their research, a lot of stuff gets left on the cutting room floor, but a lot of that stuff could be very useful for some of the communities and communities of color that we work with. And so I think by having an additional thing of having a more diverse pool of researchers is that we ask different questions, which is, again, is not the definition of why we have researchers. So if we think about all the questions that aren't being asked of the communities, or the responses that aren't being given, by the communities because they don't see the diversity of the staff that the unions present to them, then I think we're missing a lot of data, and I think a lot, again, what's research about data, and we're always talking about being strategic. So I think those are some really important things to realize, is how much we are missing, how the conversations are different or shortened or modified when people of color are not in the room to sort of ask some of those questions. And I think that translates a lot into the campaigns and the victories and the losses. So I think that the idea of having people of color researchers, particularly Black researchers, is really important, not just solely because we're trying to diversify the workplace that we all work in, but we're also really trying to get different and better outcomes in the campaigns that we are a part of.
Okay, great. Thank you, Mark. Cassandra?
Not too much more to say, but I mean, really appreciated hearing from Mark and hearing folks' questions, and would encourage, if anyone has any follow-up comments or suggestions or reactions, please feel free to get in touch. I'm always looking to learn more, as I continue doing this job and building our research team over the years. So appreciate the opportunity and look forward to continuing the conversation.
All right. Okay, and thank you, both you, Mark and Cassandra, for participating as presenters. We really appreciate it. And just to remind everyone, February 15th, 2 p.m. in Washington, D.C. at Jobs with Justice office, we're going to be having a Black union researchers convening, sort of building on what we're doing here. We can start the process of building a network of Black researchers, mentorship program, and it should be good, and that'll just be the beginning. So I want to thank you all for calling in, and thank you to our presenters. Thank you all. Goodbye.